Jerry Hogue, the valuable lessons of my unrecognized mentors. The valuable lessons of my unrecognized mentors, Jerry Hogue.
Good evening. If I ask you to identify the most significant mentors who significantly influenced your life, who would you identify? In Toastmasters, we are quite familiar with the familiar role of the mentor. When we became mentors in many clubs, when we became members in many clubs, we were assigned a mentor. And most of us during our time in Toastmasters have also served as mentors for others. Many of us in our places of work have also been served by or served as mentors for others, whether it was formal or informal. Now, I'm confident that just asking the question and talking about the term mentors, many of you probably already have in mind the top one or two, maybe two, three or more significant mentors in your life. Madam Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, and guests, today I want to draw our attention to those who we didn't recognize as mentors at the time, and to the lessons we didn't realize we learned until a later time. I could have subtitled this speech, "What We Didn't Know We Were Learning from Those Who Didn't Know They Were Mentors." I'd like to use one of the most common examples of an unrecognized mentor. In my experience with diverse groups over a period of several years, when you ask people to identify the top influencers and mentors in their life, at least 75% of the adults and probably 50% of the youth will name a parent or a grandparent, or what I would call a parent figure, like a teacher, a coach, a coworker, and in some cases, even a sibling. Now, the group that I'm talking about are our parents. Now, you may say, now, wait a minute, Jerry. You're saying that most of us recognize our parents as significant mentors, and yet you're classifying them as unrecognized mentors? That sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. Because at the time, they did not see themselves as mentors. They saw themselves as parents. They had the responsibility of preparing us for adulthood, for work, and for citizenship. And our parents, in many cases, made it clear, particularly in my family, I'm your parent. I am not your buddy. Now, also at the time, we did not see them as mentors. We saw them as parents. We were minors who were in submission or rebellion, depending on your teenage years, until we could reach that point of independent adulthood, if we could just survive that long. So what changed? What brought them from the dark to the light? I would suggest to you that at a later time, there was a shift in perspective, not theirs, but ours. Many of you may be familiar with the often quoted Mark Twain. When I was a boy of 14, my father was the most ignorant man that I knew. I could hardly stand to be around him. But when I reached 21, I was amazed at how much he had learned in 7 years. Now, let me illustrate with a story. In the mid-1960s, we lived on a small family farm. My dad was cultivating the row crops, and my brother and I had the responsibility of following along behind to uncover any of the small plants that became covered with the dirt. Now, Dad left us in the field to finish the work, and he went on to another field. He came back later to pick us up. My brother and I were ready to jump on the tractor and go to the next field. So I was a little surprised when Dad climbed down off the tractor and began to walk through the field. I realized he was checking our work. After all, we were only 8 and 10 years old. Now, in the process of just a few rows, Dad found several plants that were still covered. He required us to walk that field again and again and again. We walked those 5 acres 5 times until he was satisfied the job was done well. Now, at the time, our reaction was, really? All 5 acres for a few small plants? But at a later time, we realized that our father had taught us 2 valuable lessons. First, about the natural consequences of our actions. What would have been the result at harvest time if that poor work had been allowed to remain? Especially when you know that that process would have been completed 2 to 3 more times before harvest. The second lesson had to do with our character. When we're given an assignment, we should strive to do it right the first time, rather than waste time doing it over. How else are we going to experience the intrinsic reward of hard work done well? Now, I've used the example of our parents. We probably have several people in our lives that fit into that category, who only at a later time, after we've gained experience and maturity, did we realize the valuable lessons we've learned and from whom we learned them. When you think about what I've said, who did you identify earlier? Were there any of those unrecognized mentors in that group? I'd like to challenge you in closing. 1, using the wisdom of hindsight to examine your life. What valuable life lessons were you learning at each stage and in each role? From whom did you learn them? Secondly, look in the mirror with some humility and ask, what valuable lessons am I sharing right now in my circle of influence? And more importantly, who in each of my areas am I serving, even when I'm none recognized? Madam Toastmaster.